He's Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter and also a contributor to Monday Morning Quarterback. He joins us on the program. Why is Le'Veon Bell a great fit for Kansas City?
Well, you mentioned the short yardage thing. I think that's certainly a factor, Dan, that Damian Williams, who had served in that role for the Chiefs, opted out. So that left a hole in the roster. I think the other thing is they still love Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Part of the thing with him, though, you look at his history, he really only was a bell cow for 1 year at LSU. Like all rookies, he's never played a season as long as he's going to play this year. And they've been relying on him pretty heavily over the first month of the season. So this allows them to move Clyde Edwards-Helaire into maybe a little bit more of a situational role now, which potentially could mean you get more out of him in December and January and February. The other thing that I'd mention, quietly, their offensive line's been a little bit of an issue. And if you look back when they struggled against the 49ers early in the Super Bowl, when they struggled early against the Chargers in week 2, when they struggled against the Patriots, and then when they lost last week, in all of those games, you see at the line of scrimmage, they're having some issues. And so one way to mitigate some of those issues is to add a great running back who can, churn out tough yards, can help you in pass protection. And Le'Veon Bell brings all of those things. So the hope is you get a motivated player here, helps you preserve Clyde Edwards-Helaire a little bit, and maybe helps you mitigate what's been a little bit of an issue on the offensive line.
Why is there a mystery around the Indianapolis Colts and their game this weekend?
I don't think it's much of a mystery, Dan. I mean, I think this is all sort of a result of what happened with the Titans and the Patriots over the last few weeks. And this is sort of where we are, and I think where we're going to be for the rest of the season, where when any team has multiple positive tests over the course of a few days, they're going to shut down the facility in the short term. I don't think it would have happened 3 or 4 weeks ago this way. But based on what happened on Tennessee, I think this is sort of the way that everybody is going to move forward now. And it's sort of interesting too. You look at it and, a lot of people have, and rightfully have said, like, these teams should be acting with the most caution they possibly can and not trying to bull through this. Well, now that they are, it's hard for me to turn around and say, okay, now we'll hit the panic button. This is what you asked for. You wanted them to be more cautious. I think they should be more cautious. Now they are being cautious. And every time one of these comes up, people want to hit the panic button. I just think they're acting out of caution. And in all likelihood, it'll be a situation like the Falcons had earlier this week, where they had 2 positive tests. They shut down for a day and they're back in the building this morning.
What's Odell Beckham Jr.'s mysterious illness?
I think it's a normal illness. And, and that's another thing, Dan, that we're going to be dealing with, because the testing isn't perfect. And I think there have been cases, not just in football, but nationwide, where people come down with it and they consistently test negative. This is going to be tricky for the NFL, because every time somebody comes down with a stomach bug, with the flu, with a cold, you almost have to treat it like it's COVID, even if the guy is testing negative. And you've been around the league for a long time, Dan. I mean, the stuff that guys fight through in November and December on an annual basis, the things that teams do to manage the flu in their locker room so guys can play. It's like the amount of guys that are doing that every single year. The public doesn't know this, but it's huge, and so this could add a very real and different dynamic to the rest of the season, where, guys just come down with normal sicknesses that you would get any November or December. And now you got to shelve them for a week or two because you're worried that it could be COVID, even if the guy is testing negative.
Stephon Gilmore, Cam Newton, good to go?
Yeah, they're a go. And, that's another interesting one, because they, obviously, I think it's a story because those are 2 very huge names, and the Patriots had a total of 4 tests over that period. But I think we saw the system at work, over the last few days, where I don't think Cam would have played against the Broncos had the game been held last weekend. And now, that game gets delayed and we have sort of this inequity. Now, the other side of it, the interesting part about it is, it also bought the Broncos time to get Drew Lock healthy, and he had a shoulder injury. And so, where, 6 days ago we would have had, I think, Rippon versus Hoyer or Rippon versus Stidham. Now we're getting Newton versus Lock, which is another kind of interesting quirk to the way all of this works.
You look at some teams, obviously we have it top heavy. There's some really good teams, but we have a whole lot. There's an abundance of bad teams right now.
Yep.
And we know that prize at the end of the season could be Trevor Lawrence here. At what point does a team say it is smarter for us, like the Jets,
Yeah.
or the Giants, maybe to a lesser degree? But at what point do you think these teams start to strategize of this is what's best for us, bigger picture, long term, particularly if you're the Jets right now?
Yeah, I think our point of reference, Dan, is probably 2011. Because I mean, look, like I've talked to scouts over the last 2 years about Trevor Lawrence, and the consensus I'd say across the board is this is a once in a decade type of prospect. And if you want to look over the last 40 years, John Elway, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, Trevor Lawrence, like I think he's that good a prospect, and so. If you remember at the end of the 2011 season, there were some questions about how the Colts were managing their roster, and there was all kinds of buzz how other teams were going to handle it. The Rams were one of those you might remember. And so I don't think it happens yet, but I think once we get to around Thanksgiving, it starts to crystallize what teams are actually in the running for that first overall pick. Maybe we start to see some stuff. As of right now, the thing that prevents it from happening now is most bad teams have people in positions of power that are fighting for their jobs. So their mentality is, I need to save my job. I'm not worried about what's happening in 2021. But as we get later in the year, I certainly think that could become a factor.
Well, you got the trade deadline coming up in a couple of weeks. Can you see the Jets trade Sam Darnold, and would there be a taker? Could the Falcons trade Matt Ryan? Would there be a taker? Would the Lions trade Matthew Stafford? Would there be a taker?
I don't think so. My guess is you wouldn't see one of the quarterbacks traded. Let's start with the Jets and Darnold. You'd be gambling big time that you wind up with the number 1 overall pick. And I think that the Jets trading Darnold would have to be tied to having the number 1 overall pick. So my guess is like Sam Darnold probably winds up on the roster the rest of the year. And whatever they do with Sam Darnold rides on where they're picking in April. And so, I think Sam Darnold would have a ton of value out there. I think baseline what Josh Rosen brought home for the Cardinals a couple of years ago, which was a 2 and a 5. But I do think it could wind up being as much as a late 1. Like say you're Pittsburgh, for example, an executive brought this up to me the other day. Do you flip the 25th pick in the draft for Sam Darnold? And now you have your potential replacement for Ben Roethlisberger. To me, that makes a lot of sense because the Steelers may never be picking high enough to get a Trevor Lawrence or a Trey Lance or a Justin Fields. So I think Sam Darnold will have some value. With Matt Ryan, I think the Falcons would need to be blown away. I know Arthur Blank and Rich McKay would like to leave that up to whoever the next coach and GM are. And then in Detroit, I think this is, again, sort of a situation where everybody there is fighting for their job. So unless the plug gets pulled on Bob Quinn or Matt Patricia, I think they're counting on Matt Stafford to help them turn it around and convince the Ford family to keep him in 2021.
A couple of things I was told prior to the draft, that the Colts were really interested in Jordan Love. And then the Packers went up and got him because they knew that was going to be the heir apparent to Phillip Rivers. And then with the Lions, that they were really kicking the tires on Tua. And I don't know if you heard that, but that was from, a source of mine who I trust. But like that explains a little bit about Green Bay worried that maybe Indianapolis was going to swoop in and take him. And then would Tua go to Detroit? And I was told that staff in Detroit was saying, look, if we don't make this work this year, we're not going to have these jobs. And therefore, they didn't want to go in on Tua and then maybe try to do something with Stafford. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and I can tell you, Dan, I can add to that. Detroit's really kicked the tires on quarterbacks for the last 2 years. In fact, if you guys remember, Dave Gettleman saying there were 2 teams he was worried about when he drafted Daniel Jones 6th instead of 17th overall. One of those teams, I think it was out there, was Washington. Jay Gruden really liked Daniel Jones. I was told the other team was Detroit, that the Giants had information that Detroit was really interested in Daniel Jones as well. And so it's not that they don't like Stafford. I think they love Matthew Stafford personally and as a player. The injuries have sort of piled up. And so that's caused them to at least take a hard look at quarterbacks, not just last year, but over the last 2 years. And what was the other one you mentioned there?
I mentioned Jordan Love to the Colts.
Jordan Love. I think the Colts. So the way the Colts view Phillip Rivers right now, he's buying them time. Chris Ballard was in Kansas City with John Dorsey, right, and Andy Reid, and they had Alex Smith on the roster. And what Alex Smith allowed them to do was it bought them time to find the long-term answer. And then when they saw somebody they really liked, they got very aggressive and went up and got him. And so the Colts are in that they've sort of created that window for themselves where, all right, like we got Phillip Rivers for right now. Hopefully this buys us a little time to find the right guy. I would not be surprised at all, Dan, if the Colts are ultra aggressive and trying to move up to go and get one of the top three. It probably won't be Lawrence, but maybe a Fields or a Lance when we get to April.
Yeah, and I still go back to, I was told that the Saints were going to take Patrick Mahomes if he was there. Yeah. Like, isn't that amazing?
Yep.
How?
Yep. That was who. So I, they were picking 11th that year. That was who Brett Veach had strong information that the Saints really, really loved him and were planning to take him 11. So that was sort of the pressure point that the Chiefs had to leap over the Saints, and they wound up with the 10th pick. That was where they needed to go to get Mahomes. And I can tell you there are two quarterbacks that Sean Payton has stood on the table for in New Orleans over the last 5 years or so. One was Patrick Mahomes. The other one he really loved was Baker Mayfield.
But, Patrick Mahomes would be third string because he'd be behind Taysom Hill on the depth chart in New Orleans, though, right?
And maybe fighting with Jameis for a roster spot, right?
Are you a Taysom Hillist?
Based on my eyes, no. Based on what my eyes are telling me is there's not. We just haven't seen enough. Like, I just haven't seen enough.
He's 30 years of age, Albert. It's not like, this is.
And I know, and that's the thing I keep coming back to is like, shouldn't we be seeing more now? But then based on my ears, and you hear the way people in New Orleans talk about him, and I mean, it's one of those things where it's like you watch him and it's like, God, they're like, I don't know, like anytime like they're in a position where he has to throw the ball, it's a complete crapshoot, right? But then you look at the guy who's calling the shots here, and it's Sean Payton. Yeah. Who knows more about quarterbacks than Sean Payton? Who's been better at coaching and developing quarterbacks over the last 15 years in the NFL than Sean Payton? And so I'd always defer to what Sean Payton thinks, and it's not just what I'm hearing. They gave him a lot of money, and so like I just like I look at it and it's like, no, I'm not seeing it. I'm with everybody else on that, but shouldn't we trust Sean Payton on this? I feel like he's earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to that position.
Yeah, no. I feel like Jameis Winston is more the future at that position than Taysom Hill.
It could be. And hey, look, I thought it was a great move by Jameis to go there. Honestly, to go rehabilitate your reputation, go to a place where you're going to get to learn. Both those guys, Taysom Hill, and somebody down there mentioned this to me, a couple of weeks ago, how, Taysom and Jameis, I imagine the graduate level quarterbacking school that those guys are in, getting to watch Drew Brees work on a day-to-day basis. I mean, that's phenomenal for both those guys, So I think Jameis, if there is something there, I think Jameis went to the place that's going to find it. Sean Payton, getting to work with Drew Brees, like you'd have to think like the different factors in play in New Orleans would smoke out whatever sort of player Jameis Winston can be. Over the next, over the course of the 2020 season.
Always great to talk to you, Albert. We appreciate the time and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan.
That's Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter and, of course, contributor to the MMQB.